now, a word from our sponsor. Ayaya songs are about our histories. Ayaya is an Inuit-owned firm that tells our stories in many languages across Canada. They are experts in publishing children's books, usually in syllabics, and they do large multi-language projects like the reports of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Commission. If you need help getting your stories into classrooms or homes in Cree, Inuktitut, or other Indigenous languages, check them out at ayaya.ca. That's ayaya.ca. Ayaya is a proud sponsor of the Roots and Hoots podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Roots and Hoots, a podcast project produced by the Legacy of Hope Foundation. Since 2020, we've been gathering, laughing, learning hard truths, and sharing in community conversations with Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. Each episode, we learn something new, and we're excited to be sharing this journey with you. Roots and Hoots is about connecting with and celebrating Indigenous people's contributions to their fields of study, work, and cultures. We also speak with allies who share how they are furthering the work of reconciliation in Canada. To learn more about the Legacy of Hope Foundation and the work that we do, please visit legacyofhope.ca.
Welcome back to another episode of Roots and Hoots. Today, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Lynn Gehl. Lynn is a member of Pikwakanagan First Nation. She is an advocate, academic, author, and artist. In this interview, Lynn shares with Gordon her knowledge on the Algonquin land claim process, the ways Indigenous veterans have been discriminated against, with specific mentions to her late great-grandfather, Joseph Gagnon, her efforts on working with Indigenous women and girls with disabilities, and the ways she sees truth and reconciliation advancing, or in some cases, stalling in Canada. Please enjoy this special episode of Roots and Hoots.
Hello, Doctor.
Quick.
Good. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Regret.
Okay, well, we might as well get started. I want to ask you, first of all, maybe you can just talk a little bit about, introduce yourself, where you come from, your family, your community, whatever you want to talk a little bit about. Go ahead.
Quick, Wakanagan Dodam, get your sipian Dunjaba, Nagojawan, Megawan Dida, Gizigate Taman, Loquan Disnakas, and Da Shaganashi knows when Lynn Gehl, and Donis and Don, she miss and Da, and she goes and Da, and we jiggy Wan and Da, and we jiggy Coon and Da, and we jiggy Morgan and Da, up to go and Dochan and Anishinaabe Quay, why, my good for inviting me. Hello, Gordon. It's nice to meet you. My name is Lynn Lynn Gehl, and I am now a member of Pikwakanagan First Nation, which is near Golden Lake in between Parliament Hill and Algonquin Park.
Yeah.
But I am calling in from Peterborough, Ontario.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you where you're from because I'm familiar with Pikwakanagan. I've been there a few times. Went to the powwow. We actually did a podcast with one of the guys there. But I wanted to also talk to you a little bit about the land claim. But first of all, maybe you can just talk a little bit about the Algonquin history and the Wampum diplomacy. What are some truths about Algonquin history that Canadians should better understand?
Okay, so yeah, I'd like to talk about, of course, I'd like to talk about Algonquin history, and who we are as Algonquin people. So our territories, most people know that it spans the Ottawa River and Ontario, what is now Ontario and Quebec. And in Ontario, we have two federally recognized Algonquin First Nations. One of them is Pikwakanagan. And in Quebec, we have 9 federally recognized Algonquin First Nations. But there are also in Ontario three unrecognized Algonquin communities during the historic treaty process and during the time when they were making reserves. Canada ignored the Algonquins, so we don't have a land treaty. Although we participated in peace treaties, we don't have a land treaty. Interestingly, most reserves are made out of the treaty process, but Pikwakanagan wasn't, and same as the reserves communities in Quebec. But also in Ontario, there's some unrecognized Algonquin communities that the British and later Quebec just refused to acknowledge, and so they don't have reserves. Champlain first recorded us in the Ottawa River in 1613, so that's like over 400 years ago. And during the fur trade and the fur wars, some of the Algonquins and Nipissing people, they spent time at Oka, but they eventually returned. And the Algonquins and Nipissing people, while they were at Oka, they were member nations of the Seven Nations of Canada, and they participated in the 1760 Treaty of Oswegatchie. It was a peace treaty where the British promised that they would take care of Algonquin lands. If they took a neutral position in the war against the British and the French, where the British and the French were fighting. Although the Algonquins and the British established that treaty in 1760, the British have never honored it. So as I said, we don't have a land treaty, which again it's different than a land claim process. But in terms of wampum diplomacy, is a system of symbolic literacy that Indigenous nations relied on to codify special relationships. The same way that the British would, issue the Royal Proclamation, we had wampum belts, and a lot of people think that wampum belts is something that only the Six Nations relied on, but that's not true. The Algonquins had wampum belts, and the Wendat had wampum belts. The Mi'kmaq had wampum belts, and it's a system of symbolic literacy where we recorded special relationships using wampum beads, purple and white, sometimes black beads.
Yeah. Well, how would you I've seen a wampum belt. I couldn't figure out how people can read those things. I mean, how do you read a wampum belt? Through symbols?
Yeah, so just like when I was learning how to read, in my early life, and just like little kids learn how to read, reading you're socialized and taught how to interpret symbols and icons, and how they string together to be words and sentences. So it's a socialization process of literacy, and in order to read wampum belts, you have to be socialized into the system of understanding how to read it. So, for example, I have made new editions of the wampum belts that were exchanged in 1764 at Treaty at Niagara, and I had to do a lot of work learning how to read them by reading the symbols and the icons. For example, the chain, and what does the chain mean?
Mhm. You've also written extensively and shared the concept of, I quote, "dipwewin" with your audience. What is dipwewin, and how does this concept guide you in your life? Dipwewin. It almost sounds like a Cree word too. So
That's right. Yeah, are you Cree?
yes, I'm Cree. Yeah.
I guess I should have asked you who you were.
Well, I'm Cree from northern Manitoba,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, dipwewin to me it sounds like um, saying something, a voice, or speaking something. Dipwewin, or speaking.
Yeah, well, it should sound familiar because the Cree and the Algonquin Anishinaabe are in the same linguistic group. So, of course, we have similarities in meaning and words and meaning. So, the boy when Chigawing, it talks about an ancient traditional way of knowing that values and appreciates heart knowledge and mind knowledge coming together to come to a truth, to come to Devoywen. Devoywen means a truth that's rooted in one's heart and one's mind. And it's a really important concept of truth, in large part because when you think about morals and where do morals come from, they move through the heart. In order to understand truth, we don't take our morals and throw them to the ground and rely on rationality, for example.
Yeah.
So when I was learning about the Algonquin land claim process, I was trying to think about how I would theorize it, and there was a lot of discussion about heart knowledge. And wherever you go in Indigenous communities, that everyone's talking about heart knowledge, and you see the icon of the heart in many of our regalias. And I was listening to several teachings about Devoywen, and one of them was this idea that when we speak to one another, we look at each other's face. And the reason we look at each other's face is because we express emotions on our face. And when you're sad, I'll be sad. And when you're happy, I'll be happy. And through that process, we embody how one another feels. We're not just listening to their words, we actually can see on their face how they're feeling, and then we there's a physiological synchronization and we feel the same way. So that was one of the teachings I learned about it. And another teaching I learned about it, and this is really important, I think, for people suffering from trauma. It's a common teaching that the longest journey is between your heart and your mind. And that means that you may be embodying some emotional knowledge, and you have to go on a journey and try to come to an intellectual understanding of it to make sure you have the whole truth. You have both the mind knowledge and the heart knowledge. And by establishing both the mind knowledge and the heart knowledge, you might be better able to navigate, for example, the trauma that you experienced. And then another teaching I learned about Devoywen Mikanchichigawing was from Rainy Gaywish, who's Medeoan, and she offered the ancient icon of two connecting circles, the mind knowledge and the heart knowledge. One circles the mind knowledge and one circles the heart knowledge. And you don't have Devoywen or truth until the two are connecting. And so that's what I decided I was going to use for my methodological theory when I was learning about the Algonquin land claim process, Dabwewen Mikancha Chigawing, which speaks to the idea that in order to have a truth, you have to have both mind knowledge and heart knowledge, and they have to be connecting.
Yeah. I think I heard you say Midewin, for, in our Cree language, Midewin is kind of like a medicine man, medicine person. What does it mean in your language?
Yeah, so
Midewin.
I'm not a language speaker. I'm just a language trier.
Okay.
So it's important that I say that. We have the Medeoan Society here in the Anishinaabe, and the Medeoan Society is, I see it as holders of our knowledge, our teachings, and our medicines. It's a series
Makes
of,
sense. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We had a couple of, we call them Midewak, of those people, teachers in our community back in the day, but um, it's kind of gone on the wayside. I think I don't know, unless somebody's doing that but not telling the people, you know what I mean, or is doing it privately. So, and it's a very interesting word and concept.
The Legacy of Hope Foundation has produced 30 exhibitions that shed light on Indigenous history. Exhibitions are mobile, standalone, and provide a unique museum-like experience that include first-hand Indigenous testimonies of the residential school system and 60 Scoop. The exhibitions promote healing and encourage acts of reconciliation. They can be hosted in schools, offices, parliaments, galleries, or any public space across Canada. To learn more about our exhibitions and borrowing, please contact our exhibitions department at exhibitions@legacyofhope.ca.
I also wanted to ask you about, when I first came to Ottawa in probably 1985, I met some Algonquins from Pikwakanagan, and they talked about, actually, it was Kirby White Duck. He was not the chief at the time. He was a counselor working here in Ottawa, and later became a chief. But he was talking about the Algonquin Pikwakanagan land claims process that they were undertaking, and they'd already started this process in '85. That's like 41 years ago. Where's that at now? Like, do you know much about it? And where's their land claims process at right now?
Yeah, so Kirby White Duck, he was the chief for a long time. He's no longer the chief right now. I think he was there for, I don't know, seems like 20 years.
Yeah.
So I think the research part of the Algonquin land claim probably started in the 1980s, but it was in the early 1990s when the land claim officially started. And I use the word land claim, but Canada and some political chiefs, they use the word modern treaty process, but it's actually a land claim. And so, that's over let's do the math. It's 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, and it's still going on. So what is with that? Why does it take so long? Right?
Yeah. Like, I thought 20 years was long, but
Yeah. I can
it must
speak.
be quite complicated.
Yeah. And I can speak about that if
It's
you
still
want me
going
to.
on?
So what's really important in understanding the land claim process is that it's only the Ontario Algonquins that are involved in the land claim process. The Algonquins in Quebec are not, and so through the land claim process, Canada has divided our nation, and that's a really controversial issue. But that's what's happening. And the other thing I would say that's important to know about the land claim process is that it's not a treaty process, contrary to what Canada likes to tell people. A treaty is about sharing the land and the resources, whereas a land claim is more about extinguishing our rights. And so that's really important. The reason why it's taking so long is because of all the controversial issues of the Algonquins in Ontario. First of all, we, as I said, we have a lot of unrecognized Algonquin communities. Although they petitioned for reservations or for a place to live, the British refused to give them any land, and so they when the Indian Act came about, they ended up being unrecognized and not identified as Indian status registration. And so that was a real difficult effort to try to find them all. But also, what has been a real huge barrier to the Algonquin land claim process in Ontario is that we've had a huge issue trying to identify who we are. As a matter of fact, we've had an influx of as many as 4,500 people who enrolled in the Algonquin enrollment law, but they aren't Algonquin. So that's been a big barrier. And a lot of people in Quebec, Algonquins, they might think that the Algonquins in Ontario, that we're all pro land claim and we are all we're all happy with this the split that they've done between the Algonquins in Ontario and the Algonquins of Quebec, but that's not true. A lot of us are very dissatisfied, and a lot of us are dissatisfied, speaking for myself, with the land claim process, because the land claim process, contrary to what the rhetoric that it's a treaty process, it is not a treaty process. Rather, the land claim process, which is a better word for it, operates under Canada's policies to extinguish or define completely Indigenous peoples' lands. And the land claim process continues to be a process of genocide versus reconciliation, in the sense that the Algonquins in Ontario are only offered 1.7% of our land, which, surely is not a treaty and surely is not about reconciliation and sharing the land. I mean, how can the Algonquin nation live off 1.7% of their land? A nation without land and resources is not a nation. It's not a nation that can take care of its members, its children, for example. So yes, I've been very critical of the land claim process, calling it a perpetuation of genocide versus reconciliation. And the way Canada manipulates people is they call it a nation-to-nation modern treaty process, and it is not. It clearly is not. 1.7% is not nation-to-nation and not about reconciliation. So yes, I've been quite outspoken about that. The Algonquins in Ontario are having a hard time, first of all, because of that terrible mandate, but second, because in our process of identifying and defining who are the Algonquins, it's become laden with many issues. As I mentioned, during the historic treaty process, the Algonquins were denied a treaty, and many of the Algonquin collectives in Ontario were denied recognition, and so they are unrecognized Algonquin people. So we're having a hard time defining them and establishing a beneficiary criteria. And one of the big issues with that is the way that power has mediated, oppressive power has mediated, and some of the so-called leaders have used community cards and hunting tags to confound who we are. So in the process of defining who we are, we've had to remove as much as 4,500 people from the Algonquin enrollment law. And there's discussions that we have to further that. There's more people that we need to remove. So everybody's heard about the Pretendian dilemma, where people are pretending to be Indians. Well, the Algonquins have had an influx of issues regarding that.
Right, pretendians, yes.
Yeah.
The 1.7% of land that you're talking about, is that where the community is at right now? Like the location of the reserve? Is that
No,
7%?
no, thanks for asking that question. So we have a little reserve near Golden Lake. I don't know the acreage. No, the 1.7% is what what Canada and Ontario is willing to provide. So the land claim area is around 36,000 square kilometers, and they're only willing to offer 129,000 acres.
Mm,
And what's really bad is it's not even contiguous. It's little pieces of land all over.
kidding. Holy jeez.
Yeah. What's really terrible about the situation is Parliament Hill sits on Algonquin land. Parliament Hill is an illegal occupation. And for some reason, its citizenry doesn't know that.
Mhm.
So it's really a terrible situation. And you can be sure Canada and Ontario are taking a lot of effort to make sure nobody knows about that.
Yeah. I'd spoke to Kirby Whiteduck about this very topic on the land claim process and the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan making claims to Parliament Hill, and he was talking about this like 30 years ago. It's still being discussed at probably at a different level now.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Ayaya songs are about our histories. Ayaya is an Inuit-owned firm that tells our stories in many languages across Canada. They are experts in publishing children's books, usually in syllabics, and they do large multi-language projects like the reports of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Commission. If you need help getting your stories into classrooms or homes in Cree, Inuktitut, or other Indigenous languages, check them out at ayaya.ca. That's ayaya.ca. Ayaya is a proud sponsor of the Roots and Hoots podcast.
You were also an advocate of recognition and justice for Indigenous veterans. Are there particular stories or pieces of history from Indigenous veterans that you think young people need to hear or should hear?
Yeah, so in my process of learning about who I am and who my family were, I recently started to look more deeply at my great grandfather. His name was Joseph Gagne. He was an Algonquin World War One veteran. And when he came back from World War One, and he applied for some benefits because he had some gunshot wounds and had shrapnel in his body, and he had been gassed. So when he came back to the Golden Lake Reserve with his wife Annie Jane Manasse and their children, he applied for some benefits, and he was told that he had to leave the reserve. So he was a returning World War One veteran, but because his father was French and his mother was Algonquin, he was told he had to leave. So this is what Canada did to returning veterans: is they use sex discrimination to deny them the land, to live on the land in the reserve community. But then also when he left the reserve, he wasn't entitled to what are known as soldier settlement benefits, which Canada provided for Indigenous veterans, the right to have some land and some farming equipment. He was also denied that.
Wow.
So it's a really horrible story. People don't realize that Algonquins were denied land in a lot of different ways, even our veterans.
Yeah. It's really like it's sad, it's ironic that Indigenous people who've been here for millions of years have to beg for land in their own country. It's really, really crazy and ridiculous.
Oh, it's horrible, and of course, Canada won't let people know that history, right? They want to disguise that. So, when I wrote a little story about Joseph, and I'm going to publish a little book, and it's going to be called Joseph Gagne, an Algonquin World War One veteran, and it just talks about his life and his denial of land and resources. And it has some nice pictures in it. Like I managed to find some copyright-free images. He traveled to the other side of the world in a ship that was known as the Olympic, which is the sister ship of the Titanic.
Right.
So that's a kind of a nice story. And then he came back on what was it called? Not the Olympic. It was the Carmania. He came back on the Carmania, and he in his attestation papers, Joseph Gagne was entitled to 2 medals, but I can't find those medals, and the medal card was missing from his attestation paper, so I don't actually know if he received them. So I've been doing a lot of thinking and learning about my great grandfather and how it was that when he came home from the war, he was told to get off his community, and then what happened to his wife and children. They weren't entitled to land. They didn't even have entitlement to reserve land, so they were doubly discriminated against.
Yeah. What responsibilities, besides the government, do Canadians have in honoring Indigenous veterans and their contributions?
Well, they should remember them, and I think about the loss that my great grandfather and great grandmother suffered, and then what happened to my grandmother and father, and we were denied land, and the settlers were given land, and that's land, that privilege that white settlers have. In the Algonquin descendants don't have that same privilege. Like I grew up really poor in a house with 10 people. We didn't have enough food, and we underwent a forced relocation. So I think about that. Like, I mean, I'm 63 years old, so financial compensation won't do much for me. But I wonder, has anybody taken that as a class action suit against Canada, the way that Canada treated the returning veterans? I do wonder about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point you're making. And I don't know, but that's really not a solution, but at least something could be done in that area in a class action lawsuit.
Yeah, maybe somebody will listen to the podcast and inform me that they already have one or that's been done, but
Yeah,
I don't know of one. But you ask a good question: how should people remember the Algonquin veterans? And I've been encouraging the Chief and Council of Pikwakanagan First Nation to highlight and promote the Algonquin veterans more visibly, because I think it will bring pride and unity and collectivity in the people there.
yeah, for sure. And maybe street names or something like that. Something that will be there for a very long time, right? Or I don't know. I mean, there's many different ways that you can honor people that made great contributions to Canada and to your people. So
Yeah. Yes, they can make little booklets. They can use flags. There's different kind of flags now. They can do all kinds of things to help us remember who they are.
yeah,
So recently, what I did is, so what happened with Joseph Gagne is he died when he was in his 50s, and he was buried in a pauper's grave. And so the Last Post Fund, which works with Veterans Canada, they helped me install a grave marker stone in the cemetery where his body is. I don't know the exact location where he rests, but I was able to confirm what cemetery he was in, and so we had a grave marker stone just in August of 2024. We had a grave marker stone installed and kind of under a tree,
yeah, yeah.
so his descendants can remember him.
Remembrance Day would be the perfect time to do something special for them.
Yeah. Yes, I'm hoping my book comes out around that time, November 8th.
Okay. Your work also, or parts of your other work, also focuses on Indigenous women and girls with disabilities. Why do you think their experiences are so often missing from the general public?
Because they're so marginalized. And it's not just Indigenous women and girls that have higher rate of disabilities, it's Indigenous people in general. And nobody wants to talk about it. I think there's a lot of shame around disability, which is unfortunate. When the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's report came out, it even neglected the issue of Indigenous women and girls with disabilities who are victims of sexual violence at a higher rate because they're more vulnerable. So when the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's report came out, I contacted um, the minister at the time, and I said, that report doesn't at all address this issue. And since then, I've been talking about it. So Indigenous women and girls, for example, actually, Indigenous people, we have a higher rate of disability. So, for example, um, the for people off reserve, the Métis and the Inuit, the disability rate is 32%, 30%, and 19%. But in the general population, it's only 22%. So a lot of people, they don't, first of all, realize that we have a higher rate of disability, and so we have higher requirements, or we need more medicines, for example.
Yeah.
But a lot of people think it's our own fault. They think it's because we're whatever, lazy or sloppy, or because we're accident prone, and that's not not true. The reason we have a higher rate of disability has to do with issues of missing and murdered Indigenous women, issues of poor housing, poor nutrition, poverty. It's not because our bodies are inferior. It's because of ongoing colonization that we have a higher rate of disabilities. So you're right. It's pushed to the side. Not many people want to talk about it, and so I've taken a lot of effort and risk to make sure that it moves closer to the center. So if people can start talking about it, such as yourself.
When you think about the status of truth and reconciliation in Canada today, what gives you hope and what more needs to be done?
Well, when you're in a land claim process where Canada refuses to share the land and resources, that question is a difficult question because most people, they want to hear a response that's happy or that's forward looking or that implies that Canada is doing a good job. Well, I can't do that, of course,
Yeah.
and for good reason. As long as Canada's land claim process continues to deny us our land and resources, we will never have reconciliation. And even today, what Mark Carney is doing, where he's push forward legislation that will give him easier access to our land and resources, it's clear that we're not in an era of reconciliation. But you ask a good question about what gives me hope, and I've been thinking about that. And the last week, I been tapping a maple tree, and the maple tree has been providing me with some sap, and I've been boiling it down to make maple syrup. And so when you ask me what gives me hope, I have to think about that tree, that tree knows what to do, and that tree is willing to provide me with gifts.
Yeah. You received numerous awards. I counted 22 in your biography, and several books and publications. What of all the awards and recognitions you received over the years, is there one that stands out the most, that means more to you?
Thank you for looking at my biography and counting up those awards. It's certainly not humble to post those online. It's so contrary, but everybody wants to know. That's how they judge whether you're entitled to a writing award, for example. They want to know what other awards you received.
Yeah.
So it's not humble to do that, but I thought I should do it. What is the most of course, I was really happy to get the Governor General's Award, which is, I know, contradictory because it comes from Canada, but I was really honored to get that award because I worked really hard regarding the matter of unknown and unstated paternity and addressing that sex discrimination in the Indian Act. I really value that award. But when I think about awards, my first writing award was probably really exciting for me. I was always applying for some. So I'm not a salaried professor, so I only moved forward with applying for grants, like writing grants, and so the first one I received though was for $5,000, and I remember when I opened the envelope and I couldn't believe that somebody gave me $5,000. I actually dropped the check on the floor. I was so excited. So that was that one was pretty exciting for me.
I guess the first one would be probably the most memorable one. Yeah.
Yeah, I was, because somebody felt my writing was worthwhile. So, I learned how to read and write in my 30s. So that was pretty exciting for me.
Well, there's so many things that I want to talk to you about as I was reading your biography. But this last two, this is a little bit off the. I didn't write this down as one of the questions I want to ask you. But I noticed that over the years, I've been in Ottawa for about 40 years now, and I've met many people here. Many from out of town. First Nations come and work here, and they usually go back home. But I've also met many people from both reserves, Algonquin reserves near here, Pikwakanagan and Kitigan-Zibi. And I noticed some names are the same. Do you know the history? I mean, if you could summarize it, is there a connection between Pikwakanagan and Kitigan-Zibi? Like, is there a history there?
Well, they have similar names like White Duck, right?
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
one.
Yes, it's interesting, and a lot of people talk about the clan system, and there's a lot of discussion and debate about that. And I don't have a definitive answer about that, but what I do think is interesting is some of the names that you hear, like. But there's a few other ones like Amik, which is beaver, I think, and
Miss-
yeah, so I'm sure that I mean, I don't know, but I'm sure that people moved, right? People flowed, and
Yeah.
all the brothers wouldn't go to the same community; they would divide, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
You're so close to each other. I mean, it's not surprising that you probably have some intermarriages between the two communities. So
that's right. Yeah, yes, that's right. I actually think maybe it's a story of two brothers, or
could be.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time, Lynn. Been talking to Dr. Lynn Gehl,
Yep.
Pikwakanagan, and I want to thank you on behalf of the Legacy of Hope Foundation and this podcast called Roots and Hoots for participating in this podcast and taking the time to do this with us. Thank you so much. And if you have any last comments you'd like to add, I want to say something that that's close to your heart or whatever. Go ahead.
Just I'd like to say thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it, and thank you to Lewis and Michelle and yourself, Gordon.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good
Miigwech.
Okay, miigwech. Thank you.
Roots and Hoots is a podcast project produced by the Legacy of Hope Foundation. For episode show notes, please visit the podcast description and make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. For more information about the work we do, please visit legacyofhope.ca.